here because James and Richard were spot on in what they were discussing. And what's coming is, potentially from the U.S. federal government, and it's not stopping at the U.S. federal government. This is actually going to spread across the globe, is the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification, CMMC. So as a background, I'm one of the first assessors, number 17 for CMMC, and Peak InfoSec is also one of the first third-party assessing organizations. We've been involved in CMMC since DoD figured out that what they were doing wasn't working when it came to supply chain risk management. So what happened was basically back in 2019, the Navy decided to do a review of how information security was going. And they found it was pretty miserable. Literally a flood of breaches and hemorrhages everywhere. The problem was everybody was just basically saying, yeah, we're protecting your data, but it wasn't really happening. It didn't even stop with the Navy doing their investigation. The DoD Department, the Department of Defense's Inspector General conducted a defense-wide assessment and found the same problem had happened across the board. All the contractors in the DoD were not really protecting the data that they were supposed to. So the reality was this was all a whole effort around self-attestation. We've heard talks about people saying, oh, I'm compliant. Oh, we're compliant because we're doing this. I've done third-party cloud assessments, and I've literally started off the conversation with being told, we're compliant because we're in Google Cloud. No, they don't do your HR background checks. They don't do your physical protection of everything. So again, people didn't understand what DoD was really asking for them. So as a result, DoD started filing things underneath the False Claims Act. They actually raised about $3 billion in revenue off of false claims from contractors who were saying they were compliant. They weren't. Well, so what is the CMMC? Fundamentally, it's Department of Defense's attempt to certify and secure the defense industrial base. It really is that supply chain risk management of every contractor that they've got that provides services to the DoD. Now, DoD will officially tell you their estimate's about 300,000. If you actually listen to the Defense Counterintelligence Agency, in DoD, they say there's actually about 3 million contractor businesses involved. And when we say that, we're not necessarily talking the guys working directly for Raytheon or Boeing. We're talking the ones that are working underneath them and underneath them and underneath them and underneath them. And by the way, this also starts to tap into the managed service providers, managed security service providers who are providing services to them. And we'll get to that as we go through this. Raytheon, as an example alone, has 30,000 direct subcontractors. That direct subcontractor subcontracts out to other people for other piece, parts, services, engineering, capabilities, things that you would not think are actually involved in the DoD department. Their supply chain is actually pretty shocking. We do work for universities that are assessing the genes of worms that could be used for DoD studies for helping to protect against biological attacks. That's not what we normally think of as government information. So in reality, what we're really talking about now is DoD is requiring certification of everybody in its supply chain going forward. And that really going forward date is 1 October 2025 right now. And they're ramping this up. The first tier level is going to be level 1. That basically means you've met 17 basic controls that makes you eligible to even compete for DoD contracts. Level 3 is now where we're into the space of you've got that controlled unclassified information. That is the government's intellectual property. Now, again, this is all going to be done and your organizations would have to be certified by a third-party assessing organization. This is a significant shift from everybody grading their own test after writing their test. So DoD recognized this, and they basically went into what is a visual test for everybody. Which one of these two is the Air Force's and our military's versus China's copy? For those that don't know, it's the top one. The bottom one, China actually broke into the entire Department of Defense supply chain vendors and stole the design specs for the F-35. Now, they didn't have the same engine, so they've got 2 engines instead of 1. I actually like that idea better. I'd rather have 2 on my plane. But the intellectual property of the Joint Strike Fighter was not created by DoD. It was created by the defense industrial chain. And what they did was they said, I want a single person fighter plane with this range, this amount of ordnance, etc. And then they put it out to the defense industrial base to design, develop, and test it. And that's how we got the Joint Strike Fighter. China knew this and attacked them and stole all the design specs that we spent billions of dollars developing to create their version of our Joint Strike Fighter. Now, what is the CMMC? It's really a 5-step model, and it's really kind of simple. When we get down to it, we kind of hit level 1. You've got federal contract information. You need to make sure you meet that basic level. Level 3 is really where they're saying, hey, you've actually got that government intellectual property, otherwise known as controlled unclassified information, and you need to actually be ready and compliant to handle that. Levels 4 and 5 are more advanced threat protections are being added in. Again, everybody, and I literally mean everybody, whether you are Raytheon, Boeing, Lockheed Martin, all the big, huge bigs, down to the little 6-person Willy Wonka's widget factory, you're being targeted. And DoD requires these requirements regardless of your level of your level of size, how big you are, how many people you've got, etc. Now, the problem is when we look at this from an assessment process, many of us have already talked about, yeah, we do an assessment, we help to plan, we remediate. But in here, we see the formal coming in and evaluating that client. And if they're not ready and they don't pass, they actually won't be certified. And if they're not certified at the level that they're supposed to be at, they lose the contract. So all of a sudden, things become a lot more critical when it comes to compliance. This is no longer about the potential of a lawsuit. This is about lost revenue that you're not winning in a contract. So how is this going to affect the MSPs and the MSSPs? The first thing every defense contractor that is involved in this has to do is they have to get their supply chain, their own supply chain, compliant. So suddenly they're making sure that they're flowing down all the DoD contract clauses from that Raytheon down to Willy Wonka's widget factory. And they need to be able to prove that they've done their due diligence, that Willy Wonka's widget factory is compliant. The scary one is for them, if they have an IT provider, they have to get them into compliance. Because the problem is most IT service providers end up using their computers, their infrastructures, their Kaseya, everything they're managing in there is on their systems. They're now outsourced their IT to you guys as the MSPs and MSSPs. You're in scope. And as a third-party assessor, I'm going to be asking, who are your IT providers? How do you manage your IT? How do you manage your information security? Oh, well, we've got such and such IT company. Oh, have you done this? No, you're non-compliant. Oh, wait, now they just lost a contract again. The other part that most people aren't paying attention to is for all the defense contractors, because you are processing this intellectual property, is that DoD wants everything where this intellectual property be posted in has to be in a FedRAMP moderate baseline. So we go from Office 365 commercial to their government compute cloud. Same thing for AWS to AWS Gov Cloud. You're moving this up into proprietary, controlled, nation state centric environments where the data never leaves the US. The problem is, again, as a managed service provider, if you're managing this environment from your systems, you're in scope. And this is what we're seeing right now as all this pressure is coming, because this is not just going to stop at the Department of Defense. So 2 weeks ago, the Department of Defense had a town hall with the Defense Industrial Base. And they presented in there and told one thing that was kind of the big boom to everybody, is that this is expanding out, and the Department of Homeland Security and the United States Coast Guard are piloting this. CMMC is also being evaluated by Department of Energy, Department of Interior, NASA, and other organizations. On top of that, NARA, who's responsible for this entire thing, has mandated this to be done across the federal government. We've already seen the Department of Education direct institutes of higher learning and education that process financial aid information to become compliant. So the federal government is going to roll this out across our government. Earlier today, I had a conversation with Canada's board that manages Canada's certifications. They're struggling to figure out how they're going to implement this in Canada. This is not only stopping at our border, this is going to affect film in the UK. This is going to affect Australia. Anywhere the federal government supply chain goes, they're going to get brought into compliance. And that will be bringing in the MSPs and MSSPs. So be ready for this. Start learning, start understanding it, and more importantly, start finding out if your customers are doing work directly or way indirectly down the supply chain for Department of Defense or other federal organizations. Because sooner or later, you're going to get brought in. And as we discussed in one of the previous panels, if you're not going to be a part of their supply compliant, if you're not going to be a part of their supply chain that's compliant, they're going to have to drop you as their provider, because otherwise they're going to lose contracts. So I'll turn this back over to you, Philip, now. If there's any questions.
Thank you very much. No, it's great to sort of hone in on that very aspect.
I think you're on mute on your end.
Really? I don't think I am.
Oh,
I'm not.
Nope, it's me.
Sorry,
I was actually had my speakers off.
Okay. No, you had me worried. Very insightful, says Rachel. And Emmy likes it. Brad Rhodes, he says, every organization is a target in this space, plain and simple. I think, yeah, no, it's really good. And it's almost like, would you like to know more session? Because the CMMC has been spoken about a few times today. And just a taster of why it is so key, I think is really, really good. Well, tell you what then, let's keep you there because you're on the next panel. And then I'll bring up our panelists and Chris Roberts for our final session. Now, Chris, if you're there, I just want to see where you are insofar as I can't quite see you yet. So